Okay, good. My name is Glenn Blackman, and I'm in the Energy Office here at the Department of Commerce, and I'm the lead on this exercise of developing replacement legislation for the fuel mix disclosure law. And I'm glad that you're here. I appreciate it. That includes the ones on the phone too. It's great to have your help on this. So I sent around an agenda last night. I got a few copies here. In terms of the welcome, one thing I wanted to do is let you know right now that at 11 o'clock we're scheduled for an emergency drill. And I didn't know about this until yesterday, or I might have made other choices. But it is what it is. And so at 11 o'clock, we're going to go down the stairs that most people go up. So it's just past the elevator at the end of the hall. We go downstairs, out the building, and at that point, there's a lot of other people doing the same thing. And we'll actually go across the railroad track. I'm really hoping there's no 11 o'clock train. They haven't told us what to do in that situation, but anyway, so we'll be over there for a few minutes, and the front desk staff will check on you as guests, and I'll check in with kind of the person who's in charge of this floor. But as I understand it, this one's even going to have trucks rolling, so we can watch a fire truck or something like that. And then I don't know how long that'll take, but bonding exercise, and we'll all be closer to each other at that point, and consensus will emerge. So that's the plan.
I just tell everybody now, I'm just saving myself, so watch out.
Simulated active
if I have to run over people,
I don't even say those words. Yeah. So anyway, that's the big, change in terms of this one. So, and for those of you on the phone, you're just going to get to hear some sirens and stuff like that. And I'm sorry that you don't get to see the fire truck. But next time, show up in person. So, with that, let's do some introductions. I've introduced myself, and I'll let Mr. Nightingale take it from there.
Mr. Nightingale, Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission.
Cliff Sears with Grant PUD.
I'm Paul Deeds with Grant PUD.
Chris Weber with Tacoma Power.
Lisa Rennie, Tacoma Power. Karen Cargill, City of Seattle Office of Intergovernmental Relations. Rose Feliciano, Seattle City Light.
Yoki Zakai, Seattle City Light.
Good morning. I'm Eric Espenhorst. I work for Seattle City Light. Kent Lopez with the Washington Electric Cooperative.
Michelle Patterson, Mason PUD 3.
Matt Samuelson, Lewis PUD.
Mary Winkie, Pacific Corp.
Dustin Till, Pacific Corp.
Dave Arbon, and I'm here on behalf of Chelan Snohomish PUDs and the City of Richland.
Brody Vista Corporation.
John Rothman at Vista Corporation.
Alex Miller, Callis PUD.
Johnny Bash, Northwest Energy Coalition.
Shall we get the...
Kyle Frankowitz with UTC.
Diana Carlin with Tacoma Power. Lewis
one more.
PUD and Callis PUD.
One more.
Marion Daca, Tacoma Public Utilities.
And Greg? Great, thanks. And so as we're going through today, let's, for the people on the phone, let's, use our names, speak up and all that. I'm not going to try to go through the people on the phone. We've got 19 of those. I would ask if you could send an email to me saying that you're on the line. That would be handy for us. And that's to glenn.blackman@commerce.wa.gov. It's the address on the agenda. So anyway, we do have some good number of people on the phone, and we'll try to involve them along the way. So with that in mind, let's look at the agenda here for a second. The first thing I want to do is I noticed in the comments that there was confusion from time to time about if we were talking about somebody telling somebody else something, that it was sometimes unclear whether we meant you tell commerce about how much electricity you use from a certain source versus telling a customer something. And so to help keep those things straight, what I've done in the draft language, and we'll try to do today, is use the word disclose when I mean a communication to a customer. So fuel mix disclosure is telling the customers the fuel mix of your product. And report is telling something to the government, to the Department of Commerce in particular. So I at least will try to avoid crossing those over. So if I'm talking about something that you need to send to the Department of Commerce, then that's a report in my mind, not a disclosure, and vice versa. Any questions about that?
I just note that this is Dustin Hill, Pacific Corp, that there's significant overlap between those two buckets. I don't think a certain communication that a regulated utility has to its regulators would also be kind of a disclosure to its customers. So it may not be as neat of a bifurcation as
that could be, yeah. So that's a fair point, and just trying to keep the confusion down, maybe not eliminate it completely.
Appreciate the distinction, but
yeah,
just pointing out that
sure,
it may not always be black and white.
Yeah, right. Thank you. So what I thought we would do is, before we look at the draft legislative language itself, that we'd go through these 8 topics, at least just a little bit, and working with that summary memo that I circulated and posted on the website, and that I've got up on the screen now. My thinking on this is that it'll help kind of orient people to the direction that we went with the draft legislation. I've got, kind of fairly concise summaries on each of these points about where we headed in this draft, and I could go over those, and there could be a few questions or discussion about those, and then we could come back from our fire drill, talk about any questions about the language in the draft itself. So that's the plan. Any other initial comments or questions? Or?
Is there a wireless password?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's out there.
I'll speak it up then.
Yeah. And then put your credit card in. Okay. So the first topic was this or purpose of the disclosure requirement, and based on the comments that we got, we felt that using the intent language that's already there from the 2000 statute was a good way to approach, with some adjustments to address a couple of issues that have emerged and that we wouldn't make any reference to the Consumer Protection Act or talk about it with that specific connection. You know, there's some language in the intent section about this being a you know, a disclosure to benefit consumers, and we would just leave it at that. So, any comments or questions about that particular point?
So I've actually been thinking about this.
This is Rose Feliciano from Seattle City Light.
Sorry. It is, and this is more of a, like, just completely random thoughts, but there are a number of reports and a number of requirements that we have to do, and how does that fit into this? Such as, you know, we have an integrated resource plan, we have, you know, 937 requirements, and how does that fit in? Because, you know, one of the things I was thinking about is for Seattle City Light, our first resource is conservation. And there's no reflection of conservation in this, and while conservation isn't load, it's actually affecting load. And I don't have an answer, but you know, if we're talking about what the fuel mix is, we should, I think, also consider some of these other requirements that we have, and how does that all fit together? So I just threw that out there with no answer.
Drop the mic.
So this is Lisa with Tacoma Power, and I think that is an interesting question. I don't know how far we can get with it, but again, Tacoma Power considers conservation and our first resource. Well, I think many utilities. I guess in general, I'm kind of really understanding this anymore.
Yeah, no. I mean, I just.
It's a good point.
But it's a kind of a question of what is relevant. You know, if this is about providing information to our customers, our investments in conservation are relevant. You know, and I don't know how you put that in. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying that we should be mindful of it at a minimum.
Sure. Yeah. No, I like that idea.
It's already reported. Yeah. Yeah, but they're not. You know, the problem. You know, we have all these different requirements. They're just not all in one piece. So you have to go here for IRP, and here for fuel mix, and here for 937, and so, you know, for the folks who have, you know, fossil facilities, you go elsewhere for that information. So.
I think, you know, we agree with that too. This is Mary Winky from PacifiCorp, and that we really need to think through, to the extent possible, how to make those disclosures or reports consistent. And if they're not consistent, that we sort of understand that there's a reason for that. You know, that they're not, that we've thought through any sort of inconsistencies, and that those inconsistencies can be explained reasonably. I have another question about the purpose piece. I know in the last iteration of this, I think there was a lot of discussion about sort of preventing deceptive practices, and we had sort of a question about, you know, what is deceptive that's currently happening. Is that something that you're still exploring, or does the fact that you're keeping the intent or the purpose from the original statute mean that that's no longer kind of a part of what this exercise is about?
Right. We don't. There's nothing in the in the draft that we'll be talking about later, or that I've circulated on that. It's just no linkage is being proposed now to the Consumer Protection Act.
So this is Kent from Washington Electric Co-ops. Are you wanting to talk about just the comments about this, or are you also wanting questions about specific changes to the intent language that you proposed?
Well, I thought we'd walk through the memo you know, in summary, kind of at a high level. I'm sort of tempted to jump into the language now too, but
well, maybe this is an easy one, and if it's not, tell me, we'll come back to it. But
okay.
the last section 7 of your new section, the intent section, the last phrase, so long as the information is provided separately from the electricity product content label. I went through this several times trying to ascertain exactly what the electricity product content label entailed and why that phrase was included in this intent section. And I don't know whether you want to get into that now or whether that's something we can talk about later, or whether you just need to pull me aside and say, here, dummy, this is what I'm talking about.
I think in the disclosure requirement, there's some an effort in the statute to say, you know, don't kind of cloud up the disclosure of the fuel mix. Like, you're not supposed to make other claims within it. And so I carried over that concept here to say that you're free to tell your customers about other things, like, you know, what generators you operate and things like that, but it still needs to be outside of the bounds of the fuel mix disclosure. Some separation there, you know, on a different page and a different insert. Maybe at least different sections of a page, that kind of thing. And we're open to wordsmithing on that too, between now and the 28th.
So when you're using the phrase the electricity product content label, that's what actually is in the disclosure report.
Right. It's
the information in the disclosure report.
Yeah, it's a little table with the percentages and the fuel mix, you know, fuel types.
So if there's the disclosure reports out there and the utility wants to give additional information, they're free to do so.
Yeah.
Okay, that's.
I mean,
I was a little that I didn't get that.
Okay. In general, that subsection 7 is the reason it's there is because we have had comments that you know, there are other things besides source the fuel that you know, like I operate this wind farm over here. Yeah, I sell the RECs and the energy to somebody else, but still, it's part of our business, and we want to communicate to our members about that business, and we want to make sure that.
So basically, what you're saying is the utility can provide additional information.
Right.
Okay.
Or
I didn't pick that up from this language.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of goes back to my point. Like, so the IRP fuel mix for us, depending on how, you know, you're reporting RECs or not, is going to look different from the Washington disclosure fuel mix. So I think what it's saying is it's okay if they're different. So I think that's part of what we're questioning. I'm not sure it makes sense that they're different, but we can get into that later. Sure.
This is Lisa Power. What Rose
Can you speak up a little, Lisa?
I'm just going back to what the concept Rose put out about energy efficiency. So presumably in this section, if we wanted to talk about energy efficiency as a resource, we could do that under this language.
Oh yeah, I think you should, you will, and this law should not interfere with that.
But the point is basically there's a base amount of information that's the same between utilities, and then they can add to it whatever they want.
Yeah. Right. Which, I mean, it's current practice.
Somewhere else.
You know, and we're not trying to change current practice in this respect.
This is Eric with Seattle. I mean, the way that the law proposes, the draft envisions some pretty big changes to the product content label. Do you have a mock-up of what it might look like? We can, rather than each of us using our imagination, we might have an idea of what you would be requiring us to show to our customers.
I don't right now. That's something I'd be willing to work on.
It'd be helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful.
And then just to be clear, so the label will be whatever it's going to be, and we can report, and that's going to be the bounds of the report, and then we can
not that label.
But this law is nothing in the law is limiting those other communications.
So long as they're not, so long as we don't try to sneak them into the bounds of the label.
There you go. That's right. Yeah.
We couldn't footnote it, for example, say, please see this page or something like that.
I don't know about footnotes. I probably not, but I'd have to think about that a little bit. So.
On that note, I think many of us generally put a footnote that say we've got nuclear power showing us things like that is coming from Bonneville.
Mm-hmm.
We add that kind of a footnote.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe we should look at those a little bit too. If there are things that need footnoting, then maybe that means they need to be part of the disclosure. So maybe we should take a look at what's being footnoted and see if we could sort that out a little bit. So I'm going to make a note to look into that a little more.
This is Dustin Till from PacifiCorp. This seems like it has the potential to result in confusion for customers if through this process we define how, the disclosure statement, what's the phrase that's used, the content label, and then the utilities are allowed, and would go in as a bill insert, and then the utilities are allowed to supplement that in the event that the methodology that has been decided in the legislation is inconsistent with the way that we view our fuel, looking at things like energy efficiency, how we report and disclose our resources to our customers and to regulators and other avenues. And then if utilities are permitted to put in additional information, you wind up with which, from a customer perspective, which one is it? And so I think it's important that we get this correct and that it's consistent across the various reporting and disclosure platforms that utilities have, because I think you have the potential to dilute the value of this content label if the utilities then can kind of add all this additional information, not strictly on the the four corners of the label, but in additional bill inserts. So I think it leads to the question of, well, how much value would that have? So yeah, just highlighting that as an issue, and I think it highlights the importance of consistency across reporting and disclosure regimes.
Yeah, right. Johnny, you had...
Yeah, Johnny from Northwest Energy Coalition. I think we need to keep in mind that this is a very simple, limited report. It's telling customers what is the content of the fuel that generated the electricity they're using. That was its original intent. It's not a complicated big deal. So I think giving them that information, yes, it's different than the IRP. Yes, it's different than the ecology reports. But keeping it very simple and straightforward so customers can look at it and understand what's there. So, yes, from your perspective as utilities, there's lots of reporting going on. From my perspective, from a customer, I just want to know the fuel I'm buying, and I live on Bainbridge, and we just went through this, what's in the fuel that I'm buying. So that's what people want to know. What did it take to produce that power?
All right, I'm going to move us on to the second topic here. And this was about strengthening the obligation of providers to claim what's theirs. And, we got comments about that not to change the requirements of actual transactions. We shouldn't be imposing a requirement to specify the source on a market where the market participants don't have a need now to specify the source. And we took that comment to heart, and we're not proposing anything around that. We are trying to state clearly that they do know the source, that they disclose it, and and that not be limited to facilities that you own or that you have long-term contracts for, that in any context where you've got, where you know the source of your purchase, not just the counterparty, but the actual generating facility, that that claim should be included in your reporting to Commerce. And then ultimately that would mean it would be included in your disclosure to your customers. So any thoughts on that particular point, or additional questions? We do, continue to encourage that we eliminate or reduce the number of amount of power that has to be treated as unspecified. Getting more specified sources is a good thing, but we're not proposing any kind of regulatory requirement in that area. Paul.
Paul Dees, Grand County. The question I have is, let's just say we have two specified sources. We have the knowledge of the source from a particular plant, but we also have the source of the RECs that we're buying, specific wind farm. Do we report the wind farm as the source?
I think we'll get to that under the REC discussion, but it sounds like you're saying that the RECs would be separated from and they would be different from the energy.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are two conditionals really. One would be it's an unspecified source that we want to have a REC to, so we don't have any conflicts with the possibility of it being assumed to be a dirty megawatt hour. But it could be that we have knowledge of the source of the power, but we're choosing to green it up with a REC, so that the actual source ends up being more or less exchanged for the source of power from the wind farm.
And that's the question that I would really like to tee up clearly for people to think about and react to, which is, we proposed that utilities should be able to use an unbundled REC and include it in its fuel mix disclosure. And so Paul's question, and it's my question, is, okay, how far would you go with that? So one step would be pairing up RECs with unspecified sources. And that's the draft language is what it goes there. But a further step would be to replace the attributes of a known source with a REC. And so that's another possibility. And we got a little bit of comment about that from Climate Solutions Renewable Northwest, expressing some concern about going that far. I would say the comments from the Center for Resource Solutions, the Green E people, they would say go all the way, it's fine. It's an open question as far as I'm concerned, and we'd appreciate your thoughts on it in the next round of comments, or now. I realize it does, in bringing us up, where it's kind of skipping over this issue, which is a big one for a lot of you, about should you be using RECs in the disclosure at all. But assuming that we are, then there's the question of how far can you go and rebundle.
And could you use comment on the phone?
Sure, go ahead.
Hey, Glenn, this is Zach. I don't know that I have an opinion either way, other than to say whether you should count RECs or not, other than to say that if you count them for unspecified source and not for any source, then you're creating an incentive to purchase more unspecified source. And I don't know how you feel about that, but
that's a good point.
I think that's what would happen. I would no longer want to, a utility would no longer want to purchase a known gas output from a gas plant, they'd rather purchase it as an unspecified source, have it go, have it get washed somehow as an unspecified source, and then put a rec on it. So that'd be my only comment.
I agree. They should be on par.
And then Alex, you had, oh, wait, we got Melissa on the phone. Go ahead, Melissa.
So I just want to clarify, too, that I think all purchases are unspecified unless you have a contract that supports a specific claim to the resource. So even if you have a tag that shows the source of the energy, you should not be able to claim that in any kind of reporting unless you have a contract that specifically says you can have rights to claim that. Because you don't know what's, if, say, for example, it's wind, that's the source, you don't know what happened to the rec associated with that. If you're just buying Schedule C firm energy in the market, it's unspecified, unless you've got a contract that's specifying it.
I'm going to go to Alex here.
Just a finer point, Alex, can you use RECs also to clean up that little portion of the EPA purchases, which results in some thermal, carbon-based generation?
Yeah, no, that's a good one to add to the question. Did you have a follow-up?
If I could just clarify, Melissa, this is Paul with Grant again. If you have a contract with a counterparty that is capable and willing to supply you with specified source, I see that as equivalent to actually having a contract for a specified source. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you would have contractual support that shows you have the rights to claim that. But I'm just talking in our normal trading today. If you're buying on ICE, on the ICE platform, that's all unspecified. I don't care where it comes from because that contract doesn't require you to have specify the resource.
I agree. Yeah, but you may have a counterparty with a large enough portfolio, and they may be willing to keep track of where they're supplying you from, in which case they can tell you what they specify.
So, this is Mary Wink at PacifiCorp. I think we're pretty opposed. We are opposed to the sort of rebundling concept in general because we think it's misleading as far as what customers are actually paying for to report RECs as energy. But setting that aside for a second, just from a logical perspective, if you're allowed to rebundle with specified, or if you're allowed to rebundle with specified, I don't know why you wouldn't be allowed to rebundle with known resources. I don't understand the logic of just limiting it to unspecified. If you're allowing that rebundling concept to be allowed under the rules.
Okay. May I ask one question?
Okay.
I'll keep it quiet on that, just to follow up specifically. If I have an exchange agreement with a wind farm, right, and I'm specifically exchanging a production from a coal plant for your wind farm, right, that would be roughly equivalent, would it not, to simply saying, I just really want your REC. So, I mean, when you talk about it not being in agreement with the whole rebundling concept, it's very easy to work around that by simply saying, I'm just going to exchange my power with the wind farm, and then I would actually take possession of the wind farm at that point.
But you wouldn't under the rules, as I understand it, you wouldn't have to have that exchange arrangement in place, right?
Right.
I mean, you could just go purchase unbundled RECs on the market and green up your entire portfolio that way.
Right. The concept here, though, is that trade is a contestable trade, right? Which means, we can actually lower the customer's bill by not forcing that kind of behavior and simply saying the REC is good enough, right? Otherwise, we're going to have a transaction cost. It's really kind of unnecessary.
Yeah, and I agree. There's different arrangements that may make different kind of sense. I think our point is that what we think is important in this fuel and disclosure is disclosing to customers what they're paying for.
I totally agree.
And for us, if they're paying, and it doesn't work in our favor necessarily, if they're paying for 50% coal, and we report it all as wind because we purchased a bunch of unbundled RECs, I think that's misleading to customers. And so that's what, and I think it's sort of less bad, or it looks less bad if you're allowing it for unspecified, but the logic is the same. And so I think that's, our concern is that we should be reporting what customers are paying for in terms of what they're paying for. And we can report the RECs too. I just think they should be not reported as energy. And that may be not your situation. You know,
my situation is I'd rather give the customer the lowest bill and not have an increased transactions cost. But if the distinction is that we don't want to have, I mean, I understand you feel as though you're miscommunicating the customer, but really all you're doing is saying in order to enforce an actual contract with the wind farm, I'm going to increase your costs. Most customers would say, please lie to me. They would rather have a lower bill and not have the fictition of an exchange of power with the wind farm that increases transaction costs. And that's really what my focus is here. Rather have a lower bill and have the effect be the same.
Right. But from the, and if I understand you correctly, the customers are still paying for the unspecified or...
No, they're paying for the wind.
They're paying for the wind.
Right. So because we would take the REC, we would take the coal, we'd match them, so you're getting wind power. We could affect the same transaction by simply having an exchange with the producer of the wind power, but that would be at a higher transaction cost.
Okay, and I think we would take a different approach. I think that, you know, our perspective is that what the customers are paying for, at least, and like I say, it could be different in different circumstances. What the customers are paying for is coal. What we would file with the UTC is, you know, our net power costs would be based on the operational characteristics of that coal plant. If we bought a REC separately, I mean, that's a good thing. We should encourage that. But it doesn't mean that that is now wind power. It has the operational characteristics of wind, or that there isn't, and that there's not emissions associated with that anymore. You know, and our perspective is that, and you know, and sometimes you can purchase, you know, how much wind would we have to buy? There's different, you know, capacity factors associated with different resources. So, you know, we could say we're 100% renewable by just purchasing enough RECs to cover the coal megawatt hours, but that.
Good, yeah.
Can I ask a question on the phone to understand your understanding?
Really, that was leading.
Well, I am sensing that this is a good topic to go further on, but I think with our 11 o'clock mandatory recess, I would like to just kind of do a bit more high-level discussion and get through the others here. So let's hold the questions and the comments, and we'll come back to it at some point. So the next topic is the one about on the disclosure to the customer, whether to incorporate emissions data. We got comments in favor and opposed to that idea. There was also some confusion. This is one where the terminology I think is helpful. We're not suggesting that utilities would need to report to Commerce their emissions. We already know where to get that information. And it's about whether the utilities would disclose to their customers the emissions that go with the fuel mix. And so whether to add that. In some states it's done that way, where there's a what I like to call the fuel and flue disclosure report. The fuel mix plus what went up the flue to make that fuel, that electricity. And the draft that you've got has, you know, includes that as a added element to the label. We've been thinking some about, and this is where that mock-up I think would be a good next step. Is so what would that look like, and you know where would you put that information? And so anyway, I think we've got here both issues of, you know, whether to do it or not, and if so, how would it be done? Rose, go ahead.
This is Rose with Seattle Citywide. So we do have some concerns about having emissions data incorporated in this. I think part of it is that we don't know what, like, what is it that how is it you would be reporting? Because, I'm a simple girl and I don't even, all I know is that emissions that are like metric tons per megawatt hour. So I'm having a hard time trying to visualize like what it is I'd be saying. Because right now I got a list of sources and I got percentages, and so I don't know how I'm reporting that. Like, how is that meaningful to a person like myself who doesn't really who gotta keep it simple. I think part of it too is that since Seattle City Light is not reporting any emissions to ecology or EPA, it is hard for me to understand what those folks who do have to report, what are they reporting now, and how does that look? And that might help me understand how that would fit into this, because I know, if you have a facility in Washington State, you have to report to ecology, but you also have to report to EPA. And so how do those two things line up? And, so I think part of it is that if you're trying to make this useful for the average customer, I have absolutely no idea how you're proposing to make that useful for the average customer. And I consider myself the average customer who rarely looks at their bill.
This is Lisa from Tacoma Power following up on that. I think our general comments to this was, well, we have some concerns. I mean, first, we're mostly concerned that the fuel mix disclosure report itself becomes much more accurate. So until we feel that we've made those improvements, we would hesitate to then have emissions being attached to this. The second issue is that I think by next session, this bill is in the mix along with carbon regulation. I think we do have the potential by doing this, setting up, 2 or 3 different places where customers can go and see get different results for their utilities emissions, and I don't think that's really in the best interest of customers. It can be confusing. There wasn't, I think, an idea about netting, basically. Maybe we can talk about a little later in the discussion that might help with some of those. Given at least the nature of a utility like Tacoma Power that's in the wholesale market, and an average doesn't really show what kind of emissions are coming in because we're buying and selling at different times of the year, different times of the day, usually trying to take advantage of low prices. That's usually when there's a high level of renewables on the system. So, yeah, I guess bottom line, until I think we feel really comfortable that we're getting closer to an accurate emissions, fuel mix disclosures might be premature, particularly in light of carbon regulations like the company.
So this is Johnny, just a question. Instead, or along with reporting percentages, would it be easier then to report the total amount of megawatt hours that you got from various sources, and then it's just kind of a estimated multiplication of, I don't know, an average tons per megawatt hour for coal or tons per megawatt hour for gas or whatever? I mean, I get your point about percentages, but I'm just thinking, I'm throwing that out there as a question.
I don't know. I think I think part of it is how does that all fit in, and like with Tacoma, we sell more than we buy, and how does that fit in? Because it is relevant. We're selling on the hydro.
And the average is a problem because it doesn't really reflect, at least on the unspecified side, what we're actually buying. So we think we're getting more fossil attributed to us than we actually do because of our marketing activities and how we are, actually when we're buying, what time of year we're buying.
Right. As we're thinking about the sort of disclosure that might be applied here, what we've been looking at, for examples, has mostly been with the green power products that the utilities are already doing. And it's not true with every utility, but in some cases, the information that they provide about their green power product includes some emissions information. I was looking yesterday at PSE's marketing materials for their green power product, and it shows for an average residential customer on the standard regular product, it's about, I've forgotten, it seemed like rows. I can't remember the units, but there was a number. It started with a 12 that was the, you know, the usual service. And if the customer paid $10 a month, their emissions would drop to a number that started with a 0, and then there was a decimal place. It was a big drop. And so in that example, PSE has provided a disclosure of their regular product. And so to me, that seems like a useful example for what we might do as part of the label, is to take some of the practices that are applied today to the green product and carry them over to the regular product. So that's sort of the concept that we think about.
We do, you know, we do a like a system emission factor for California that we then translate into like a, I think it's grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. So it's at sort of the customer consumption level. You know, just that one number might be the most useful in terms of, you know, and I think we have some of the same concerns about including the emissions in the fuel mix report, but I think that would be something that would be relatively reasonable, though you'd have to accommodate the concerns about, you know, purchases and sales and things like that. But
right. And we are thinking that this would, it's actually, you know, a very straightforward calculation from the fuel mix to the emissions number, because it's just applying these known emissions factors for each of the resources and coming up with a number. And so whatever strengths or weaknesses exist with the fuel mix itself, in terms of how it's calculated, those are going to get carried over to this emissions number. And I think that goes to Tacoma's point about, well, how accurate is the disclosure of the fuel mix, and so therefore how accurate would the emissions number be? Go ahead.
This is Dustin with PacifiCorp. Maybe tying it back to the fuel mix calculation would exacerbate what we see as the fiction of a rebundled fuel mix, right? And so what you would have the potential to tell customers is, you know, regardless of where the electrons come from, you're getting all wind power and it has 0 emissions. And that's it's an untruth. And I don't think that that's what customers want. I think customers want the truth. And so if you're going to build a flue piece off the fuel piece, you're going to magnify and exacerbate any fictions that are baked in to the fuel piece. So I think that we need to think about that.
I think that's the point you're making, that any weaknesses or strengths that are in the fuel mix itself are going to bleed through into the associated emissions.
Right. But the other part of that point is that it's not more complicated.
It's not time. I just wanted to make sure y'all are aware of the learn from the found.
Yeah.
We're running. We are running.
They're not running.
Those flying elbows are rosy.
Just comment on that.
Yeah.
And maybe to the weeds, but in the new section 1, where, you know, the introduction of emissions characteristics is included, I think it might be maybe just what is a characteristic of, you know, what you were thinking in terms of what would the metric be, you know.
For emissions?
Yeah, is it just going to be generic if it were
That's
generic?
Section 7.
Well, I'm looking at new section 1.
Yeah, go to new section 7. That's all. Whole section on emissions characteristics.
Oh, yeah. I know, but it's,
there's some questions I've got when we get there, but
yeah, I think that might be part of this discussion is, just by fuel, a fuel type rather than applying it to system mixes and things like that. So it's just general information. That might be something
Go ahead, Kyle.
An observation that might reconcile the RECs versus rebundling question. And it seems like, as Pacific Power was saying, if we allow rebundling in the reporting of the fuel mix, then that creates some unintended consequences and kind of subverts the point of the disclosures. But if we use the emissions piece of the reporting as a way to kind of reconcile that, it's like, okay, we're providing our megawatt hours with a bunch of coal, but the emissions from that coal in the emissions part of this requirement are offset by the RECs that we've purchased. And so even though we're both showing you that your power is coming from coal and that those emissions are offset through RECs, right? This might be, at least it might be an opportunity to reconcile those things without rubber stamping either rebundling or not rebundling as a solution to the
And I think we'd be supportive of that. Essentially, you're still communicating information about RECs.
That's the concept that we had supported in earlier drafts. And it works conversely. If you had wind power and sold the REC, it would be reported as wind, but you would indicate that the REC had been unbundled.
I think that was our interest in doing maybe a separate reporting for REC, which indicates to the customer how is it a renewable that still retains its REC? Is it a thermal resource that has been greened up with REC? Or some idea so they have a better sense of it, but how their fuel mix is being composed. It's separate. I mean, yeah, I think it's.
But I don't know how to reconcile this either way. But there's no way to color code the electron. This is Zach, by the way. I'm sorry. There's no way to color code the electron, so you don't actually know. Even if you buy 100% from coal, you actually don't know that the fuel you're delivering to your customers is coal. You don't know where the electrons are coming from.
But we know what they're paying for. Right. We know what they're paying for. I think to us that's the more critical distinction.
I don't disagree with that. But if you bought 1 megawatt from coal and bought 1 REC, the customers are paying for the REC as well. So they should based on your concern, the customer should also and the REC represents the fuel.
My point is, though, is that the cost of purchasing, say, 100 megawatts of coal and 100 RECs is going to be very, very different from the cost of purchasing 100 megawatts of wind. And
maybe in the short term. Maybe we want to move to a world where that's different. We're building a bunch of cost-effective wind. We think that it's going to change over time, but that's the reality for now. And I think if we're communicating to customers what they're paying for, we should communicate that they're paying for 100 megawatts of coal and 100 RECs. And that communicating it as if they're paying for 100 megawatts of wind is inaccurate and misleading.
This is Rose with Galaxy Light. I am not an engineer, but I'm pretty sure a REC does not turn on a light. And so we need to remind ourselves that if this is what's turning on the light, yes, there's a lot of stuff that we're buying on the market that we don't know what it is. And we don't know if it's coal. We don't know if it's, wind that doesn't have a REC with it. I think we just need to be careful that we're not, greenwashing. And, if I'm buying 100 megawatts of coal, I can't just put 100 megawatts of RECs on it and call it green. I mean, it's not.
But you will agree that I can take 100 megawatts of coal, sell it to a green wind farm developer, and have that developer sell me 100 megawatts of wind power.
Just so you know, right there, you've already confused me. Okay, if you are delivering, I'm
delivering 100 megawatts of coal to the wind farm, and the wind farm is delivering me 100 megawatts worth of wind production. Simple as that. I have.
You're turning on my lights.
And
you're turning my lights on with wind.
With wind.
Then
and I should have credit for wind, regardless of how I got it. whether I paid the wind farm directly for it or I exchanged the energy. Either way, I get the right to claim that wind. So we can do it the easy way, or we can do it the hard way.
Well, this calls into question the whole rec idea, right? I mean, what you're saying is it's sort of bogus, and I'm not sure I necessarily have a position one way or other. But if you had a closed system and you used recs, right, and shifted those around, would that coal production show up for somebody?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, I think, Alex, is that the coal attributes don't disappear in this. They end up going into the net system mix, which becomes more coal intensive, and so unspecified power, when it gets assigned attributes, it's going to inherit the coal attributes that were displaced by that rec.
So what if, because this is Lewis's idea somewhat, and we think wind is wind, coal is coal, hydro is hydro. Here's what we served our customers with. That is our fuel mix. And then aside from that is, because of the accounting or the ability to sell or purchase the environmental attributes, the result of that is we are 90% carbon free in our portfolio. So you're getting rid of the converse of that, though, right, is can you report wind as wind if you've sold off the recs? Sure, you served my load with wind, but now you're going aside from that. That's the question. Either you believe the rec system or you don't. It's entirely I'm talking about two separate things here.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm trying to call into question the whole rec concept. I mean, but I think there are lots of ways in which these concepts make sense in the voluntary market, you know, where you're really concerned about environmental marketing claims, and you are very concerned that people are saying things that they're renewable, and when they don't have the recs, and they're not really. And I think that those policies make sense in that context. In the context of, you know, a regulatory requirement or communicating to customers what they're paying for, I think you really do have to rethink the role that recs play. And I think the reality is, in other regulatory settings, like say like a net power cost filing, you know, you're going to go into that net power cost filing with a wind resource, and you're not going to call it not wind if you don't have the rec, because the characteristics of what the customers are paying for is based on the operational characters of that resource, and not the rec. So
But you're going to have your net power cost is going to be the cost of the power generated.
For those of you on the phone, we don't know quite when we'll be back, but it's probably 20 minutes.
Now leaving your phone
to run past noon.
Okay.
And
Glenn, you know, this is Alex from Alex, on the emissions data, we're probably going to continue to oppose it if there is movement on a carbon bill, which by all accounts it seems like there will be either in the legislature or the initiative process, and on the theory of not having it in two places differently and all that. So,
okay.
Just so you're aware.
Yeah. Okay. And then what I want to do is, on the fourth item, incorporating a rec, I sort of feel like that's been gone over pretty well already along the way. Is there any additional points that people feel like they want to make or questions?
Glenn, we had a concern about the requirement that the rec be retired in order to include renewable resources in the mix. I don't know if that goes with this section, but should I make that comment now?
No,
It's a good
go
point.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Because we can bank rec for a year beyond what it's generated.
We can make a redundant.
And then,
Yeah, and then actually the UTC has a requirement where you don't actually retire the recs, like for 2016 compliance year, we retire the recs in 2018, and that's a regulatory requirement. So my concern is that if we can't, because of that lag that would exist every year, if we we essentially would never be able to report anything in the fuel mix that was renewable.
Right.
So, and again, kind of in a customer, you know, so the customers would question, I think, you know, aren't you complying with RPS? How can you have no renewables? So I think that's really problematic. And so we own the RECs for RPS compliance, but they wouldn't be retired until this regulatory.
Can't you retire them? I mean, that's a deadline to retire by. I think you retire them any time before that.
You can.
Yeah.
I
mean, that's,
You don't have to wait.
No.
But if we
Right.
wanted to bank it
But
for
if you
you
could
and use
bank it,
for future-
If you were
You have
banking
a
it for
similar
future,
power.
you have to retire it by that.
Right,
But-
but you would not have retired any time for the disclosure report.
not
You might miss that, yeah.
but
True.
Well, and so I would think about those two separately. If you're banking it and using it in a different year, then it seems to me that's the right year in which to include it in your fuel mix disclosure. Is when you're using it to
when you retired it.
to make the attributes. Well, it's not when you retire, but when if you use a 2016 REC in 2017, and it's in 2017 that you had that wind power, versus the other issue, this timing one where we do the fuel mix work, at least we try to do it, a lot quicker than the compliance work that's done around the EIA. And that, to me, is that's what I've been thinking about, Tom, is, and Dave's got, you know, one approach is, well, retire in time for fuel mix, and then you'll already have it retired for EIA, but I also understand that there's benefit in waiting because you may need to make little adjustments here and there. So that timing question is one that we need to think about.
Okay. And actually, at least for us, I don't know about you guys, but there usually are those types of adjustments before we sort of finalize.
There usually are?
There usually are.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, and I know we don't want to go back to the whole rebundling thing, but I think the same concepts are implicated. You know, if the fuel mix disclosure should be sort of what customers are paying for in a particular year, you know, they're paying for the energy that was produced in that year. And that's not necessarily reflective of the RECs or megawatt hours that are used for RPS compliance. So I think it's a similar, it in fact kind of goes back to this whole decision about how you're using RECs in the report. But I would definitely encourage, even if you do ultimately conclude that RECs can be reported as energy, that you allow some flexibility in this retirement question to accommodate our ability to report to customers what they've paid for, even in terms of RECs, when they would have paid for the REC, even if they're not retired yet.
This is Yogi Zakai at Seattle City Light. Another thing is if we go down the route of accounting for RECs in this report, then there should be some discussion about how voluntary green power programs are going to be reported or displayed as opposed to the conventional product mix, because if RECs are accounted for, then the customers who participate in a voluntary green power program would have a different mix than the rest of the utilities.
And are you thinking that's a positive outcome, or are you saying that's a negative?
I'm saying it's a discussion that we need to have if we go down that route.
Because my impression is that they do have a different mix. That a green power product is, that's why people are buying it, is because it has different fuel attributes. And
so that it might necessitate a different label.
yeah, no, I think it would. Right, and that, in the legislation, in the draft language, you're required to label separately each product.
Plus, there's just differences in the statute. A voluntary green power program is older than I-937. The definitions are all also different in that, and we're creating a new type of green power program, basically turning it into grants for things like solar or low-income solar, those kind of things. So I think the green power program itself may be changing or should change, but reflected more consistently than others. I think technology, I don't know. I guess we still are, I guess where we are is if we go down this path, we'd like to see dual work the next step a little bit. I think that would be the coolest at this point.
Just a note on the timing and retirement of RECs. Not only do we bank them, but we also don't retire them until we receive the audit from the state auditor, and that just adds more time.
Yeah, right. That's where you get to that 2-year period, like that. Sounds like it's at the UTC too. Okay, the formatting changes. I think most of the comments were no.
Well, just clarification on factor number 4. The last paragraph, or the last sentence in the first paragraph of your recommendation, for sources without RECs, including hydro, the reporting supplier must own the non-power attributes. When you say reporting supplier, is that, for instance, Bonneville with their hydro, or is that the utility taking that hydro as the reporting entity? The reporting supplier was a little confusing to me.
Can you tell me again where you're looking at?
Page 5, recommendation, first paragraph, last sentence.
Oh, okay. I think what we meant there was reporting to Commerce, so that would be, could be either, the reports that we get from Bonneville, which isn't really mandated by law, or it could be a utility that's making a report to us.
I think that's an important distinction, because I need to go back. I don't know if anybody in here knows, but I need to go back to see, do we as a utility own all the non-power attributes, 1-to-1 ratio for all the power delivered for us? I'm not sure.
Okay. Our kind of thinking behind, in terms of hydro, is that because there aren't RECs, that whoever gets the energy has the attributes. Or maybe I shouldn't say because there aren't RECs, but as long as there aren't RECs, and whoever gets the energy has the attributes. So there are opportunities outside of Washington law for those to be split up. And so we do see more and more hydro registered in Regis, and RECs are created, but that's really not for Washington compliance, I don't think. So, okay. The formatting stuff, again, I guess I take the point that this will be a better discussion with an example in front of you, and we didn't really get much comment on this, so let's move along.
Well, this is Rose with Seattle City Light. I will comment on it. Sorry. I don't have an issue if you have like all utilities and you can have a little grid that shows where everybody is, but once you start talking about regional data, I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about, and I'm concerned that that's really an apples to oranges comparison because they don't do similar reporting. If you're comparing it to the Energy Information Agency data, then why are we doing a fuel mix report? Why don't we just show everybody our Energy Information data, agency data? So I'm just like, I just am concerned that it will not be very meaningful to customers because it's not a similar comparison when you're talking beyond the state limit.
So this is the state fuel mix that we compute, represents the aggregation of all the utility reports. And so that is a potential comparison to an individual utility's disclosure.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem within the state because, you know, each of us all have to report. I'm just saying you've talked about regional. That's the concern I have, is because I think the regional, you know, I don't know what they're reporting or not reporting in Idaho or Oregon.
Right.
And so it wouldn't be as useful, I think.
Okay, no, I got that. And I appreciate you clarifying that.
Yeah.
The regional one that's a big concern. Okay. Outdated and cumbersome. Again, not many comments on this, but I think you'll see, or you have seen in the draft, what I had in mind, because there's a lot of strikeouts that we've offered up for your comment, and we did get some concern expressed about oversight authority for commerce. The draft on that regard doesn't make much change. It does, however, allow commerce to adopt rules to implement this program. We do think that would be a useful tool in terms of making sure that things are consistent and providing opportunity for stakeholders to be involved in setting the requirements. But we haven't added any new, enforcement authority or anything like that. Anything else on that particular topic that people wanted to highlight? Okay. The end users who aren't utilities. This one, and in the draft, we didn't make much of a change. The current definitions refer to entities that serve more than one customer, and the draft changes that so that it serve a single customer. You don't be required to disclose. And so I think in the comments there were a lot of kind of shoulder shrugging, like, who are you talking about? And that, I would say, we're continuing to think about that. And like one thing that's come up in the last couple of days has been people who sell power at electric vehicle charging stations. They're not regulated by the UTC, but maybe there should be a disclosure at the station about the content of the electricity that's provided there. So that's, again, that's not in the draft that we have now, but it's a topic that we're...
Wouldn't that be covered under the utilities disclosure, the utility that is supplying that station? And my other question is, I thought when we were working on this with the legislature a couple of years ago that we landed on the part that these charging stations don't charge for power. Since they're not regulated utilities, they don't charge for power. They're actually just charging you for the time that you're plugged in. I guess does that make sense?
I know JJ worked on it. I didn't. I'll have to check, but that's a possibility.
I believe that what they're charging is for is a service.
Yeah, they're charging.
So they're charging you to be able to connect in, and they're charging you for the physical parking spot.
And the networking.
And it would include,
but they're not charging you a per kilowatt. It's not a per kilowatt charge. Yeah, it's a service charge, not a kilowatt hour charge or something like that. So
So they have
that
to
goes.
buy it from the utility. They still have to
Yeah,
buy the power from the
and that's my
utility. They're
question
not
is, why
really
wouldn't that be
selling
cut?
it, you know?
Yeah.
I couldn't even think of one where, when this was raised to me, I couldn't even think of one that would go out to an IPP and buy. You know, it'd just be too much distribution hassle.
Yeah.
I
Look into that.
I do think, on the second point about are they selling electricity or not, I've asked some people like at the UTC to help me clarify that.
Okay.
And on the first point about what they would disclose, I agree that in most cases they're going to take the utility label and that's what they would post. Is, you know, so it wouldn't be any different unless an operator chose to buy, say, the green power product that is available from that utility, in which case they would post the label that goes with the green power product.
But it would still be something that the utility had already disclosed.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It's just that this would be a transaction at which a disclosure could be required.
So what exactly? I don't even understand. Like, if I have an electric vehicle and I'm going to charge, whether it's at Bellevue Square or at Pacific Place, how exactly are you envisioning I'm getting this information? Like,
Don't put it right on the machine.
Yeah.
The charge station.
I thought it'd be downloaded while you were
no,
charging.
I know. You know, like literally. What do you? I mean, like, what are you thinking? What happened?
There's a card posted next to the charging machine that has the fuel mix label on the card.
Wow, okay, I'm just going to say, like, literally, that sounds like a royal pain. Like, so Seattle City Light has to go around to all the charging stations in our service territory and put this stuff up? Like, it's like, anyway.
No, it's worse than that because you'd be forcing these small providers to have another regulation that they have to follow to, be able to.
Anyway,
that I think is a better characterization of the situation.
Well, either way,
The you did.
I thought when the question was asked on the comments that it was more a thing of, do you have a massive data center and are you buying all your power from independent power producers?
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what I
And that's
thought.
the scope of what I thought we were talking about. And also, I didn't know what the scope of the issue is in the state. I think the charging stations are probably pretty minor.
And it may be that this is something that comes and goes. I'm just saying the last few days we've talked about it.
And if they're not selling electricity, it might be a moot point anyway.
Well, and I guess our concern would be going back to the accuracy of the fuel mix disclosure report, and we think, if your fuel source for your car is hydropower, which we are predominantly hydropower, that's a selling factor. So that's a positive for us. And if we don't feel confident that we think we're getting more fossil attributed to us than we are in fact providing, then that would be an issue. So I would, take this back to our comfort would be around, when it wouldn't be comfortable with this until the accuracy is something we're good about.
Okay, so anyway, in the draft language, there's a minor change which might cover the company that's selling to a large single customer. There's nothing in there about posting it on the charging stations, and we'll see where things go from there.
Glenn, I had a quick follow-up on that. We probably don't have time.
Pardon?
I was just curious if you envision that applying to load aggregators, which we don't have now, but exist, throughout the country, and oftentimes they are representing purchases from multiple utilities. So, for example, you could have somebody who'll lock up the contracts for the local Walmarts across several states.
That's true, yeah.
And they'll be buying from a lot of different utilities and putting together their own fuel mix.
CAA.
Right, and that's what, when I read that, I was envisioning that world that we don't quite have yet, but is coming, because it already exists in other places.
Yeah, and it would seem to me that this disclosure would be appropriate for them as well.
Right.
I agree with you. That's a little bit hypothetical right now, but it seems like that ought to be established up front. Because, I mean, I think in general, the more we see competition of any sort, then the better the argument for disclosure becomes.
So if I, on the internet and use a data center in Washington, it's got to pop up the fuel mix of the data center.
I think you're overreading it out.
Oh, okay.
Last item was flexibility. And, I think that one was maybe a little bit hard to define what you mean by flexible. The draft, I would say the main thing it does in order to try to accommodate flexibility is to be less prescriptive. And so in particular, the rules about how you do the net system mix are deleted, and instead Commerce is directed to come up with a characterization of the net system mix that reflects the resources that are available to the utilities in our state. So it's a much more open-ended direction.
So one thought about the net system mix is it would be great to see the actual calculations so we could all understand exactly how it was developed, which I don't think we get now.
Okay, yeah. And we've had some stakeholder meetings around that are more on that side, kind of a more practical side of it. And I won't try to do that here in the legislative discussion, but I will work on providing that opportunity.
I think Glenn from Cliff Steers from Grant PD, I think Grant would support sort of a group to participate in a discussion on how that's calculated, will be calculated in the future.
Yeah, good. I think it will be better with the practitioners involved in it.
Yes. Not me.
Oh. So you're volunteering somebody else.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Really volunteering my coworkers for that.
Practitioners.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Kent, do you want to take a moment with the last item on the summary here?
I think it speaks for itself.
Read it. That's right. Go back and read his letter.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Pretty straightforward.
It is.
Well, we would disagree.
All right, so I don't really have much time at all left for the draft, but I do want to say a little bit about what we gave you, and that is that be sure to read the comments on the side, because I tried when we are even more uncertain than general about, what would be the best thing to do, to highlight those in the comments. And so as you're working on your comments back to us, to be sure and look at our notes and give us some thinking about some of those things. And one of those in particular is on page 6 of the draft. It has to do with the disclosure to the customers. and whether it'd be better for the label to have a separate line for unknown or unspecified sources versus the current practice, which is to assign characteristics to the unknown sources and blend it back up into the stated categories. And I've heard arguments on both sides about why it's good to do it one way or the other way. And I will say that if we leave it unspecified, it does mean that some of the spillover where you end up getting tagged with fuels that you don't remember ever actually buying, is because of the attribution of characteristics to the unspecified sources. So if it were left unspecified, then some of those small amounts that show up in the other categories wouldn't be there anymore. So anyway, that's one in particular that we'd love to get some feedback on as you're doing your written comments.
So would you guys be willing to consider showing zero carbon resources, which would include legacy hydro, renewables, and nuclear?
You mean, so on the label showing them in a different way, or because I mean they are on the label, I suppose.
Well, it depends what you include in hydro, I guess.
I mean this. What we intend here is all hydro. I did raise as an alternative, is, to separate the legacy from the
As long as that's all hydro.
That's the current draft. Yeah. I was sure.
Glenn, I have a question. So one is we were looking at some of this stuff, and I think that you need to define this other non-renewable generation and unspecified resources. But also, listening to what you were just saying, is that if I am having these two additional categories of non-renewable generation and unknown, then then there's no system mix, because it's either going to fall into those. I mean, I'm either going to know it's hydro, wind, biomass. I'm gonna have X number of unspecified resources because those are my market purchases, and I'm gonna have whatever you define as other non-renewable generation. So there is no net system mix, right? Is that getting rid of a net system mix?
It would. You wouldn't need the net system mix in order to show the fuel sources. It would still be used if there's an emissions calculation. So the unspecified sources, it was one way to come up with the emissions factor for them would be to use the net system mix. There are other ways, but that would be the way we do it now. But the net system mix would play a diminished role in the disclosure if there's this separate line item for unspecified. And the other non-renewable, I mean, it's bunker fuel, running old telephone poles, whatever, it's just whatever is left that isn't one of those listed above. Was there a comment on the phone?
Yeah, there's a question on the phone, and it kind of sort of has come up, but not really. So I wanted to ask it in the last couple of minutes we have left here. As if you do intend to use RECs, again, and I'm not taking a position either way, but my question is for utilities that take power from Bonneville. How do those RECs? So let's believe you buy 100 megawatts from Bonneville, and you have 15 megawatts of RECs because that's your statutory requirement. The way you envision this, is your intent to say you're 15% wind fuel and 85% Bonneville, and then Bonneville is made up of, let's make believe it's made up of hydro and something else. do you pick which fuels from Bonneville you're taking, or do you just take a share of Bonneville?
Right.
Because then you'd have more fuel than you have load. So how would you allocate what fuel you're taking? That wasn't clear in your language, and I'd like to understand what your thinking is there.
Yeah, I think we need to do some work on that point, and I'm not sure what the right answer would be. If you're looking for the answer in the draft language, I think it's not there because
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, but I think understanding what your thought process is in that would help us, maybe others, with what type of comments we would give you.
Yeah. Well, and so
or it may not, but
let's just start with the concept, the one that goes even beyond what's in the draft, which is that you could pair a rec with any resource. In that case, it seems to me that the Bonneville resources could be paired up with the unbundled recs to create a fuel mix that would be, that would reflect the recs and would be, as a result of that, different from what the Bonneville mix looks like. With the intermediate case, where you can only pair it up with unspecified sources, then perhaps the answer is that the unspecified portion of Bonneville's mix is what could be paired up with a rec. I don't know. You might want to think that through, but that's a possibility.
I guess my question, I use Bonneville as an example, but my question is, even if you have more fuel than you have load, do you pick and choose which fuel you're delivering, or are you still intending to keep that the pro rata allocation? I thought you said you were getting rid of it, but it wasn't clear in that language. So if I have 150 megawatts of fuel and I only have 100 megawatts of load, does the utility designate and declare? Is that your intent, or is your intent that we still keep that pro rata allocation?
Yeah, I guess kind of my default would be that you'd continue to allocate between your retail load and your market sales. You'd allocate the resources that way. Of course, if your market sales specify a source, then that attribute should follow the sale, and so it shouldn't be part of your retail fuel mix.
Right, but if your sales are unspecified, then
I think. Right, so I think the current practice, and probably the continuing, would be to to assign the same fuel mix to all of those, which does mean that a little bit of everything gets moved out of the retail and over into the system. However, that does bring up this other, some of us have had some discussions about whether to use net or gross purchases or sales, and so we might be able to reduce the quantities there, but that's not really a legislative discussion, so I won't try to spend our last 3 seconds on that.
So I know that has come up, and I'm sorry, I would like to spend a couple seconds on that as a way to kind of dealing over attribution issue and the idea of just taking your sales and netting your purchase. If you come up with a positive, then all your reporting on your contracts and your specified resources. That's a simple way. For utilities that are in the market a lot.
Mm-hmm.
For arbitrage reasons.
Right.
So I just was curious, is that, you said isn't part of the legislation, but if it, how, I don't know, how serious are you about discussing that?
we're very interested in discussing it. It's something that we look at as a change that we can make under existing law and that we could either do or not do under the draft that we've put forward. And so I don't really want
Probably put that in.
to, I don't want to hang it on the bill because there is this slight chance that they wouldn't actually pass the legislature. So I'd like to keep that one alive no matter what. That's how interested we are in it.
So I think, I don't know if it's exactly related, but in some of the language and if you were to provide with us, I think, what would look like under what your kind of is worth and disposition reporting. I think it's a couple things that we just noted is that we need to recognize that you have to specify that it's retail load, and that you also, that, you know, a lot of times we will make purchases that may not necessarily be used to serve load. And so, you know, like, I think there needs to be better clarity on how you're discussing that, because, you know, we can net it out.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if that's what you're proposing, okay. I mean, like, you know,
Dave had a comment.
This is David Nightingale with the UTC, and we've been dealing with this for the last couple years. We've got 2 years of energy and emissions intensity reports that the IOUs have done for us, and sales and purchases and netting out how to account for that. I mean, we're still fine-tuning that, figuring out how to do that to be most representative. It's not an easy task to do. I don't know if you need to define that in legislation, but it is something, you know, if legislation passed or you continue with your existing and you wanted to deal with that, you know, Pacific Corp and Avista and PSC, we've all been wrestling with that in the last couple of years. So we've got probably some insights that are more than a 40-second remaining in this meeting can probably help. But those reports are out there too. If you want to look at, you know, what we come up with.
That would be interesting to know, because for that,
Yeah.
because you've got a lot of publics that are not,
Yeah, I mean, everybody.
don't have that particular outlet.
Right, right.
Can you send the link?
Sure. Yeah, there's actually, do you want a link to the reports? Yeah, I can send that to Glenn, and you can send it on to other, if you already have it, probably already have it. If you don't have it, I'll send it to you.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I did.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Johnny, and it's after meeting time, we have to run, but what are you expecting from us next? What would be most helpful? We
Right.
came sort of ready to talk about the language, and I guess it sounds like what you're asking is that we put that in writing now.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the comment, the written comment opportunity is we've asked for those by July 28th.
Okay.
And between now and July 28th, if anybody's wanting to engage further on this, more of a one-to-one or small group basis, I'd be glad to do some of that. And
So we talked earlier about you maybe producing a sample
yeah.
mock-up. Would that be available before this, or should we go ahead and make comments with the mock-up coming after the comment deadline? What's your thinking on that?
I think it'd be better to hold a mock-up, at least hold your comments on the mock-up and try to do that separately. I don't know, it's possible I would get something out before
Because
then.
seeing that might help explain some of the language you got drafted here, and that's what I was wondering is how does that timing mesh with this deadline of the 28th?
Right. I don't know. I'm not going to promise it, but we'll see.
But if you do put it out later, we'll get another chance to comment.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I do, so after the 28th, I don't have anything specific in mind in terms of further process, but I will look and see when the next fire drill is and try to schedule it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was entertaining.
Yeah.
We do appreciate the party atmosphere.
All right. Any other closing comments? Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate you coming and engaging so positively.